The morning in Brimstone Ford smelled of wet leather, wood smoke, and fresh hay. Clean scents that made Maria Hollis feel like the day might, against the odds, behave itself. She moved through the livery in her usual deliberate way, checking girths with a thumb's pressure, running a warm currycomb in calm ovals along a roan mare's flank, listening to the barn's familiar chorus. The soft snort of geldings, the patient cluck of pigeons in the rafters, the sleepy knock of a loose stall latch she would fix before noon. She wore her sleeves buttoned even in the heat, and a bandana kept her dark hair pinned close. People in Brimstone Ford called her Liveryman because the sign over the doors said Hollis Livery and Cart, because old words take time to learn new shapes. She never corrected them, and the town never thought to ask. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. She slid a pitchfork into the straw pile, and dust motes rose, glittering an angled sun that fell through 3 missing shingles she had been meaning to replace. A grasshopper clung to the pitchfork handle. She blew on it, gentle as a prayer, and it sprang away. Across the lane, the wake-up bell from Alma Purdue's boarding house clanged twice, and the sound unfurled over the square like a banner. Maria counted the beats without seeming to, the way she counted everything. The bell meant the baker would already have loaves cooling. It meant Ezra Pike, Brimstone's gray-mustached marshal, would be crossing the square soon to make his slow first circuit, the old bullet crease in his thigh making that tiny hitch in his stride when the weather threatened rain. She stroked the roan between the eyes, and the horse's lids lowered to half-moons. "Easy now," she murmured to the animal, as much to herself as to the mare. The roan's name was Junebug, named by a carter's daughter who'd laughed when Maria suggested it. The daughter now lived 2 towns over with a teacher and sent letters, careful loops of ink that arrived folded around pressed petals. They were hidden beneath a loose plank behind Maria's desk, along with other papers that mattered. A wagon creaked to a stop by the wide livery doors. A dust-caked rancher climbed down with the help of a cracked whipstock and watched Maria as if expecting some different shape to step from the dim cool of the barn. He was new, or knew enough not to know her ways. "You the liveryman?" he asked. "I am," she said. The words were quiet, but not apologetic. She had learned that softness could be armor when worn right. He glanced at her sleeves, at the neat line of them, at her unremarkable hat that shadowed her eyes. "Heard this place is kept better than most. My team needs a rest, 2 nights if you've got the stalls." "I've got them," Maria answered. $2 for the pair, feed included. If they dance, it's $2.50. "Fair?" he said, surprised by neither the rate nor the voice. He handed over coins. Maria weighed them in her palm by feel alone and nodded. She did not look at their faces unless she had to. She led the team in, steady, always slow, always watchful. He followed a step and a half behind, the distance men in the territory kept when they hadn't yet decided what they thought of you. "Marshal Pike about?" he asked as they walked the central aisle. "Will be," Maria said. "The storm's in the bones." "You know him?" "Everyone does." She smiled into the roan's mane, and it made a faint wave under her cheek like wind against grass. The rancher grunted. "Heard tell the vulture riders were seen in the North Gulch last week. That trouble headed this way?" The roan's ear flicked. Maria's hand kept moving. "Gulch rumors travel faster than horses," she said. "Storms choose their own fences to jump." He laughed at that, grateful for the kindness of a joke. "Name's Barlow," he offered. "If you hear the storm rear back over the ridge, you send a boy with word." "I'll send a girl," she said, and he blinked, then nodded, as if something small had been set right inside him. He left a strip of jerky for Junebug and went out humming a hymn whose words had learned desert dust before they learned town boards. The livery quieted again. Maria finished with the team, checked water guckets, fixed the loose latch. She stopped by the tack wall and ran fingertips along the row of bridles, pausing at a bit scored by an old tooth. Without looking, her other hand found the side shelf where she kept a plain stoneware mug. She set it on the desk. It was empty. She set it with the open mouth toward the alley door where a sliver of daylight pooled. From the lane, no one could have said it meant anything. To Maria, it meant everything. 3 breaths later, Ezra Pike leaned in the alley door without knocking, as he always did. He never commented on the mug. He looked over her shoulder, wherever she was, and never made her turn. "Mornin', Hollis," he said. His voice carried a gravel kindness. "Barlow tells me your weather bones ache." "His do," she replied. "I borrow them." He came in, touched his hat brim, and let his eyes travel the stalls. He was a man who catalogued things out of habit, not hunger. It made him a decent marshal and a better neighbor. "How'd you sleep?" he asked, the way he asked it most mornings. "Quiet," she said, the lie so gentle it barely touched the air before it settled into it. He laughed that he had seen something out of Slate Ridge. Old Red Ferg saw buzzards spooking over the Badwater Flats. He ain't the sort to miscount wings. Maria set the curry comb down and wiped her hands. Buzzards spook for many reasons. He swears he saw men under them, 6, maybe 8, riding at dusk with their hats pulled low. "Men ride at dusk," she said. Ezra studied her profile. In the blue dim of the barn, her face looked like it had been taught by wind, planes and gentle angles, eyes the color of rainwater in a bucket. Her sleeves were, as always, immaculate. The marshal had not once seen her roll them past her wrists. The left cuff, he knew, had a neat little patch beneath the fold, almost invisible. A moth had found it the first winter he'd known her. She had mended it with thread that didn't match until time and washing made it all one color. Gus from the telegraph office claims a wire stalled out of Dodge. Grief in the relay. He got as far as Vulture, and a smear of ink like a black wing took the rest. "Wires stall," Maria said. It could be a comfort. Ezra heard the decision inside it and let it stand. "You'll keep your doors shut at dark," he said. "Not as an order. Alma will keep a lamp in the boarding house window. I'll post Josiah by the bank and have Cullen on the back street." Maria nodded. "If the riders do come, they're not the kind to rob a bank before they make a point. You thinking they'll want to make one?" She didn't answer for a moment. She took the mug from the desk and turned it mouth down. That meant the talk was done. That was their rule. Ezra tipped his hat again and left the way he came, the alley door whispering closed behind him. Maria stood still. Dust motes hung in a slow universe around her. She counted her breaths until she reached 10, and then she let them go all at once. The barn sighed with her. She walked to the back stall that didn't rent. It held no horse, and never had. In that stall, beneath a careful blanket stack and a crate of warped shoes, a narrow trunk sat with its hinges oiled and its corners worn smooth by years. She kneeled before it and rested her palms on the lid without lifting it. Inside, wrapped in canvas, lay the thing Brimstone Ford would not understand until it was forced to. A long-blued revolver with knurled grips, the cylinder polished like a prayer bead from the years it had been spun. A holster, plain, rigged for a cross-draw beneath a coat. A coil of green silk string, a corked bottle of linseed oil. She did not open the trunk. She set her fingertips against the wood, in a pattern her hands had learned without instruction. 2 taps, then 3, then 2 again. It counted the distance, from breath to decision. She stood and dusted her knees, and went back to the day's work. By noon, summer heat drew the resin out of the livery beams, and the air tasted slightly of pine. Maria took a stool to the doorway and ate half an apple and the heel of bread while the square moved in its ordinary rhythms. Alma's curtains breathed in the faint breeze. The schoolhouse bell gave a softer, quicker tinkle that meant Mrs. Cates had lost her place reading and laughed about it. A pair of railroad men bragged in the shade about a bridge that could hold the devil's own weight of iron. A piano in the saloon tested the same 2 bars of a hymn and failed at the same phrase each time. She listened to it all the way some folks put their gear to a trek. Barlow returned, hat in hand. "Marshal says we might see trouble," he said. "You need a board up or a brace set somewhere, you say the word." "I need you to pretend everything is ordinary," Maria said. "Same for your team. Horses feel the weather and folks." Barlow looked at her long enough to hear the wisdom of it. "I'll keep ordinary then," he promised, and he did. When he left, his whistle skipped only twice and found its tune again. The ordinary held until a little before sundown. That was when the telegraph office spat a noise that was not quite a bell and not quite a cry, and Gus opened his door to lean out with ink on his knuckles like fresh bruises. Ezra was a shadow crossing the square, too fast for his old wound. Maria didn't move. Movement had a way of becoming invitation. Gus shouted, excitement and fear braided in his voice. "Ezra, it's come through clean enough this time. Vulture riders, 8 strong, leader Jace Vargo. Humiliate and burn." He swallowed, looked at the wire as if it would set his hands on fire. Says, "Avoid fight if possible. They make sport of resistance." The piano in the saloon stopped trying to find its hymn. A woman drew laundry off a line without folding it. Ezra's eyes rose to the sky and measured cloud height. "Night then," he told the air. "They like their crowds quiet." Maria finished her apple. She took her stool back inside. She closed the big sliding doors halfway, open enough for air, narrow enough to be misread as fear. She lit the lanterns down the aisle, not all at once, but in a patient order that let the barn carry its own twilight. She checked each stall again, and each knot, and each bucket. She placed the stoneware mug back on the desk with its mouth toward the alley, and thought about turning it down again, then didn't. She needed Ezra to come and go without questions. He came with twilight under his hat brim and a fold of paper in his hand. "We'll put townsfolk in the church basement and Alma's root cellar. I want you there with them." "I can't," Maria said softly, and Ezra's jaw worked like he was chewing an answer so careful it would not cut him on the way out. "I won't ask why. I'll ask what you need." She let her days travel the barn like she was taking inventory, and in a way she was. 2 water barrels by the front, a bucket of sand near the lantern hooks. I'll keep the aisle swept. Ezra nodded, relief and worry both visible because he had learned long ago that hiding them served no one. He set the paper on the desk and slid it toward her without turning it around. Names. The riders. Jace Vargo, 2 brothers named Called and Cross, a woman goes by Sparrow, a pair who take their hats the same way, might be twins, might be men who sold their names for the trick of it, a young one with a jackrabbit stare. They like to call folks out to the middle of the square and make them dance. They've been known to take a livery first. Maria watched his hands and he spoke. The left thumb rubbed the right knuckle. The knuckle had a pale scar where a ring once sat. Ezra's wife had died of fever 6 summers ago. Maria had brought in broth when the house emptied after the last casserole dish was returned. He had kept the spoon long after the soup was gone, some days just to have something in his hand. "They'll come for your sign," Ezra said. "They always break the name on the door first." "Names aren't wood," Maria said. She slid the paper back without reading it. "Put Alma behind the bar at the saloon. She's better at talking men out of bad ideas than anyone in 3 counties. "She's already there," Ezra said, and a smile flared in the dim, brief as matchlight. "I thought you'd say that." He hesitated, then added, "If anything happens, if you need me to come running, knock the lantern off the 3rd hook. I'll see the light go and know it was you." 3 for help, she said, committing it to the ledger in her mind where she kept such things. 3 for help, 2 for water, 1 for goodbye. "And you, Ezra Pike, you keep yourself breathing." He touched the brim of his hat for a 3rd time, a thing he never did, and left with his stride bent to urgency. Maria waited until his shadow had thinned in the alley before she went to the back stall. This time, she opened the trunk. The smell rose like a book opened after years. Oil and canvas, and that faint sweetness old metal sometimes has. She unrolled the revolver. It lay there like a hinge between lives. It was a long pattern Colt, blued barrel dull where a palm would ride. Along the front strap, near the screw, a faint, worn engraving showed 2 wings. Someone who once owned the pistol liked to press a thumb there before drawing. The habit had polished the wings until they looked like water. She did not call it by any of the names men give guns. She called it this, the way a farmer calls a good spade this, or faithful kettle this. She checked each chamber by feel, the way you might count a sleeping child's breaths. She set the cylinder gently and let it click home, quiet as settling teeth. She buckled the rig around her waist beneath her coat. The cross-draw placed a butt under her left arm where the coat's drape hid it. She rolled her shoulders once. The movement smoothed from habit into invisibility. She closed the trunk and drew the blanket over it again. She stood and listened to the town for a long time, letting the noises come to her. A door bolt thudding across a shop front. Someone dragging a bench out of the square. Alma's voice, steady and bright as she called for another lamp to be brought from the back. Farther off, the river made its low, glass-breaking sound where it ran shallow over shale. Dark took the square in a single, decisive breath. Horses approached. It was not the hurry of flight, not the fatigue of distance. It was parade, the mean kind, the pace a bully uses when he knows the room cannot leave before he is finished. 8 horses by the measure of the sound, though 2 were lighter, a switch of weight telling of a smaller rider or faster heartbeat. They stopped where the hitch rails lined the square, spurs chimed once, and fell silent. A laugh walked around the boarded fronts looking through a door to let it in. Mireille blew out the aisle lamps one by one until only the front pair burned. She stepped to the livery doors, slid them wider, and stood in the gap where the cool air met the day's stored heat. She kept both hands visible, both empty. Softness can be a shield, emptiness can be too. 8 figures came into the lantern wash and arranged themselves like pieces on a board someone had played too often. The leader wore a dust coat the color of an old bruise, and his hat sat the way only men from along the river wear them, brim tugged down in front to shade eyes that have watched water for danger that cannot hear. His face was all angles, handsome the way a hawk is handsome when it isn't hungry. He had a scar under his lower lip that looked like a dimple until he smiled, and then it turned into a small, private cruelty. "You the liveryman?" he asked. "I am," Mireille said. His gaze took the measure of her and then chose to misunderstand. "Kinda small for the job," he observed. "Kinda careful, too. Those sleeves look like a sermon." "They look clean," Mireille corrected. "Stalls are cheaper if I don't have to wrestle your horses." He laughed. The riders behind him laughed when he did and stopped when he did. Their humor was rented, not owned. "Name's Jace Vargo," he said, like he was setting a coin on a counter. "You can call me Jace. My men answer to whatever I tell them to answer to. We came because we lost our way and then found it again when someone said there was a town here that didn't know how to mind its manners. I like to help with manners." Mireille's eyes slid to the hitch rail. The horses were too thin for men who claimed to be thriving. One of them had rings rubbed into his hair on his chest where breast collar had chafed. The young one, with the jackrabbit stare, thin wrists, nervous mouth, rode a skewbald with feet trimmed too short. The skewbald stood with a heel cocked, uncomfortable. Sparrow, if she was Sparrow, slouched like a poem trained to stand guard duty, lean, dangerous, beautiful in the way broken things sometimes are when they decide breaking isn't enough. Mireille said, "You'll want stalls," as if the talk could be pushed into ordinary by sheer patience. $2 the pair. "What I want," Jay said, stepping closer until his dust coat brushed the livery's doorframe, is to know which of your men carries the name on your sign. A liveryman should be here to mind the barn. Instead, I find you." Marie let her gaze rest where his dustcoat had trailed a line in the door dust. "You found the liveryman," she said. He looked her over like a man checks a rope bridge before his pride makes the decision for him. "I never liked liars. Show me the man who keeps your ledgers. Tell him Jace Vargo wants a word. He'll want it with both ears." Mireille held the stillness a heartbeat longer than politeness allowed, then tipped her head toward the chalkboard nailed beside the door. On it, in small, careful script that favored straight backs and fair spacing, the day's boarding was listed with initials. HOLLISM was at the bottom every day because no one likes to think the barn runs itself. "Your man's shy," Jace decided. "We'll play another game. Bring out the best horse you've got. I want to see if Brim Ford knows what a horse is."
Maria did not look back toward the stalls. "Horses aren't cards," she said. "They aren't for playing in the square so men with dust in their teeth can clap." Sparrow smiled without softness. Listen to her lace the words. Her voice was scarred silk. Makes me think of a needle. I get a rash around needles. "Bring out the horse," Jace said. The smile stayed on him, but stopped in his eyes. "Or we start somewhere else. Banks can come after. I like to begin with whatever makes a place believe it is itself." He glanced at the sign, Hollis, gold leaf rubbed thin by a decade of weather, and tapped it with one knuckle. The small sound was louder than his boots. Maria stepped out into the square where the lantern light thinned to night. It made the space between the riders and the barn a kind of river she could not see to the bottom of. She rested her palm against the wood's rib and felt the wood's rib. It gave her the count of the grain. Somewhere to her left, a window shade moved and held. "You'll get your horse after you get your water. You ride in dry, your animals pay for your vanity. There's the trough. I won't sell stalls to men who won't water first. I won't sell hay to men who throw it at their beasts while they argue about who's toughest." "You hear that?" Jace asked his riders. "The liveryman's wife has rules." Laughter again, the echo kind. Maria kept her face where only he could read it. "The liveryman isn't married," she said, and Jace's smile tilted like a coin caught on a nail. "Bring water," he told the young one. "Fill the trough. I want to see how obedience sits on you." The jackrabbit boy scrambled to obey, slopping a bucket twice on the way from the pump. Each time, he flinched like a dog that had learned a hand the wrong way. Jace strolled along the hitch rail, trailing his fingers across withers, with a lover's casual cruelty. "We came from Slate Ridge there. They were polite. We told the fellow to show us his prayer voice, and he sang until his throat bled. We prefer cooperation. It makes the night prettier." He stopped in front of Maria. "Tell me something. When a town whispers, who do you think it whispers to first?" "The person who listens," Maria said. He approved. "Good answer. My second question is easy. What's that under your coat?" Maria let the coat hang. She breathed once evenly. "You brought 8 riders to ask a liveryman about his coat? It's too heavy a garment for August. Either you don't feel heat or you're hiding a ghost." He leaned in. The scar at his lip made the smile look torn. "You the ghost, liveryman?" "I feel heat," she said, "but I've learned to avoid the kind that leaves scars." "Shame," he said. "I like scars. They make a body honest." He tapped the sign again. "Your town whispers your name, Maria Hollis. HOLLIS on the door. M on the board. You keep the animals. You keep the books. You keep your sleeves buttoned. You got a ghost under there as sure as my horse has a brand." Ezra's voice came from the saloon porch across the square, low and unhurried. "Evening, Jace." He did not call him Mr. or Vargo. He called him by a first name like it was a rope thrown just short of a storm. "Marshal Pike, you limp prettier than Slate Ridge's lawman did." He crawled. You want to show us how Brimstone Ford greets its guests? Guests knock. You're knocking with gun butts. Then open. We'll call it a party. Town's closed. That's the business hours tonight. Then we'll begin with who's open. And he looked at the livery doors as a man is going to ride through, no matter how many boards it remembers to be. Bring the horse, he told Maria one more time. If you don't, I'll pour your lamp oil on your hay and let you watch your quiet burn out in a way that makes new names. Maria lowered her eyes to the dust and then raised them not in challenge, but in an old, unfashionable courtesy. You'll have your horse, but you'll treat the trough first, like I told you. I like obedience dressed as advice. He stepped back and flicked 2 fingers. Sparrow, with me. Maria turned into the cool of the barn. She did not hurry. Junebug tossed her head at the first stall as if she had learned lines for this moment and remembered them all. Maria rubbed the mare's blaze and whispered nonsense that held shape like sense when carried on a calm breath. She chose not Junebug, and not the Palomino at the second stall, and not the big-boned drafter at the end who watched the world like a judge. She chose the bay in the third stall, the one nobody looked at twice. A plain, dark, neat-footed mare with a strip so narrowed down her face it looked like a thread tugged by a careful hand. "You're going to walk with me," Maria said to the bay, "and you're going to show them how not to be fools." She slipped the halter, patted the mare's neck, and led her into the aisle. The mare's ears pricked once and then set themselves like 2 little sails, catching the pressure of Maria's fingers and making of it a wind. Sparrow leaned in the doorway and watched, her pupils wide as if the lanterns had gone suddenly bright. "You handled them like they're secrets," she said. "They are," Maria replied. "You always talk like poems?" Sparrow asked. "Only when people threaten to light my hay," Maria said, and Sparrow's laugh was surprised enough to be almost kind. Maria brought the bay into the square. She let the mare stand head low and waited while Jace pretended to look for flaws. He didn't know horses. He knew how to dress ignorance as appetite. He blew into the mare's nostrils as if it meant something. She flicked an ear and breathed him back. He slapped her shoulder too hard, and Maria's jaw set in a line no one read. "Name?" he asked. "Thread," Maria said. "You'll ride her like you ride a prayer, not too fast and not drunk." He gathered the reins and made a half show of swinging aboard. He was competent enough in the saddle. Bullies learn a fair seat to make their cruelty look like skill. He tried to make Thread dance with the bit. Thread carried her head like she was considering a violin. She refused to trot crooked in a way that pleased Maria almost beyond bearing. "You run this whole thing alone?" Jace asked, circling once in front of the doors. "Feed, shoeing, books, boys who spit on floors?" "Alma sends a boy. I sent him back with lessons he can repeat." "Lessons," Jace echoed. "Let's teach one." He jerked the reins, trying to make Thread back into the water trough. The mare planted her feet and ignored him. "Stubborn," he said, irritated for the first time. "Honest," Maria corrected. "She won't step backward into what she can't see. Neither should men." He swung down with a flare of coat that was choreography, not temper. He shoved the reins into Sparrow's hand. "I don't like sermons," he said again. "I prefer entertainment." He flicked his fingers. "Gulled. Cross. Take that sign down and bring it to me." The brothers, stout, fair, matching in the way men get when long years shave off the edges that used to set them apart, stepped to the door with their shoulders already remembering someone else's orders. They set hands to the Hollis board. Maria didn't move. The bay's breath brushed her sleeve. Across the square, Ezra took one step down from the saloon porch and stopped. The whole town held its breath in an old, involuntary prayer they had all forgotten the words to. Cald's fingertips slid under the bottom of the sign. He levered. The rusty nails groaned. "Wait," Jace said too quickly, and both brothers froze. He looked at Maria with narrowed delight. "If we're going to make a thing of it, let's make a thing. We'll pull it down when the whole town watches. Go on, Marshal. Ring a bell." "I don't ring bells for other men's fun," Ezra said. "Then I'll ring them for you." Jace turned his head slightly. "Jack," he said, and the young rider started like a hare.
Fetch the church rope. Tug it until the dead wake up.
The boy swallowed, glanced at Maria, and ran. Past the hitch rail, past the pump, past the line where the shadows of the boarding house eaves made a second, colder night. He passed within arm's reach of her, and for the space of a heartbeat she could have caught his sleeve and said a life's worth of things into his ear. She did nothing. You cannot change a river's course with one handful of water. You can only show it the bank. The bell's first clamor tore the square in half. Windows lit, then went dark again as hands fumbled for lamps. Doors opened inches and closed. A baby cried once and remembered sleep. The sound came again, and then it steadied into the kind of ringing that calls a town to either wedding or fire. Jace stood with his boots planted in the dust and his chin raised like a conductor. "People of Brimstone Ford," he called, and his voice would have made a preacher jealous. "Your marshal is tired. Your bankers are cowards. Your liveryman is a woman in a coat. Come see a lesson and thank me after." Maria felt the town gather without having to turn her head. The hush of 10, then 20, then 50 bodies. The square filled at its edges like water behind a dam. Ezra stayed where he was, hands easy, mouth set. Alma slid along the saloon's porch rail and came to stand near him with a rifle she held like a broom, unimpressed, ready. "Called across." Chase gestured with the pleasure of a man conducting his favorite movement. "Do the honors." The brothers levered again and the nailhead squealed. The sign sagged. Maria watched the board do what boards do when patience meets pry. It let go where the wood had softened and fought where time had left it strong. A corner tore free and swung like a hinge toward her. She did not reach for it. Jace reached instead. He caught the dropping corner with 2 fingers and held it there, the way a cat holds a moth to make it believe in flight a second longer. He looked at Maria and then at the town, and he said, "Names or promises? I'm your promise now." He nodded. "Tear it." A hand touched Maria's elbow, light and brief. Alma's voice came from somewhere between breath and sound. Alma murmured, "We can still talk. We have until someone fires." "Talk," Maria said, and the word felt like a gate valve turned. She looked at Jace. "We can say something else." He tilted his head. "Say it." "You rode in tired. Your horses are thin. Your young one's afraid to stop moving because he thinks stillness is what gets punished. You've got a woman who laughs like she's hoping someone will catch the laugh and hand it back to her as a better thing. You've got 2 brothers whose names were given to them and then taken by someone who liked to match. You got a long coat and a scar, and you built a shape around them both. You could water your horses. You could sleep. You could leave the sign where it is." Jace considered her as if she were a puzzle with fewer pieces than he expected. Then he smiled, and the smile was a blade held under cloth. "Sparrow," he said, without looking away from Maria, "light the corner of that board for me." Sparrow produced a match with magician's ease. She struck it on her belt buckle, and the sulfur flare painted her teeth the color of warnings. She held the small flame toward the corner where the leaf had thinned to raw oak. "Don't," Ezra said. Sparrow paused as if courtesy were a hat she used to own and still fit once a year. "Why?" Ezra nodded toward Maria without taking his eyes from Jace. "Ask her." Maria said, "A woman's right to work without explaining why her hands know what they know." The match dropped an amber tear of sulfur. Sparrow's mouth twitched. "I used to sweep the floor of a tailor's shop. A seamstress there had hands that could set a hem so fine it looked like breath. Men said she made magic. Then the season changed, and they said it was just thread. I breathed out. The match died between finger and thumb with a small sigh. I don't light things when the wrong person begs me to." Jace's smile thinned. "Then I'll do it." He took the matchbook from Sparrow with a flourish and struck one himself, too hard. The flame spat.
He reached for the board. Maria moved. It did not look like a move, not at first. It looked like a small adjustment of balance, the way a person leans to hear better. Her coat fell on a line that took a second to be noticed and a lifetime to be forgotten. Her left hand rose empty, pointing. Her right hand was not empty anymore. The revolver came free with a quiet that made every noise in the square go sharp. The barrel did not waver. The sight was a sliver of night swallowed by night. Her breath did not change. Her heartbeat did not jump. Some hearts are trained, not tamed. Jace froze with the lit match a finger's width from the board. His eyes went not to the gun, but to her hands, because men who have seen death by inches know better than to look where pride tells them to. What he saw there made his jaw go soft at the hinge, a small surprise he could not school in time. He saw no tremor. He saw sleeves still buttoned. Don't. The word touched the match like a wind. The flame leaned, then corrected, stubborn the way little fires are. Jace smiled again, because a smile is cheaper than nerve. You going to shoot me over a board? You going to write a sermon in blood? I'm going to keep one thing from becoming another. This is wood. I'll keep it wood. He wanted to laugh and couldn't find where he had put the part of himself that did that without work. He glanced at Ezra. Ezra did not move. Alma held her rifle like it was bored and would grow dangerous if bored too long.
The jackrabbit boy whispered, audible because the square had learned to make silence deep as a well. Jace, he said, don't. Jace's chin lifted a degree. The match guttered, leaned, recovered. He watched Mireya watching the flame. Marshal, he said, without looking at Ezra, if she kills me over a sign, you'll hang her for it tomorrow. I wonder if tomorrow knows her name. Tomorrow's busy, Ezra answered. It'll learn if it has to. Jace laughed then, because he had to give himself a signature in this moment, or he would not recognize himself when morning came. He pinched the match to keep it from dying easily, and then held it to the board. Mireya fired. The sound broke the night into tidy, terrible pieces. The bullet took the match's head the way a tide takes a sandcastle's corner. Not cruel, not kind, inevitable. Sulfur spit out with a small, starry complaint and died in the dust at Jace's feet. He stared at the dead match, and then at the sign with a fascination so pure it was almost beautiful. He reached up and touched the corner with 2 fingers. When he drew them down, they left 2 real human streaks that said he existed in this world where friction made heat, and heat made strangers look at your hand. Again, he said softly, amazed. She can do it again. He lifted the matchbook with a deliberate slowness that made the square sway on its feet. Mireya's barrel did not move. I can, she said. Sparrow's laugh came in low, pleased. Oh, Stitch, she murmured, you mended the fire. Put it down, Ezra said to Jace. You saw what you needed. I saw a trick, Jace said. He smiled with his scar. I want to see the rest of the show. He nodded to Called and Cross. Tear the sign. I like watching people choose what they are after someone shows them a miracle. Don't, Mireya said again. Or you'll shoot my fingers, my heart, my pride. Which one do you think I keep the softest? He made the smallest motion with his wrist, and the square's weight shifted. The young rider took a half step, confused. Sparrow's hands tightened on the reins. The brothers put their shoulders back against the wood. Alma's rifle lifted a hair. Ezra's breath did not change, but the beat of it felt like a drum no one could ignore. Mireya measured the moment. She felt the town like a string under her fingers. It quivered at the exact pitch that comes 1 note before it snaps. The brothers heaved. The sign screamed in wood. Mireya's left hand moved a 1/4 inch, and the barrel tracked with it like a compass needle waking. If you tear it, she said, each word as level as water in a filled glass. Brimstone Ford belongs to whatever you do next. If you leave it hanging, it still belongs to itself. Jace inhaled to say something clever. He never got the air.
From the alley behind Mireia, where the cool gathers and cats teach each other how to be shadows, came the sound of boots that did not match the rhythm of any man in the square. Not eight, not Ezra, not kindness. A ninth set, late and eager, trotted in. "Boss," he called, high and bright, and pleased to have found its own echo. "Boss, we brought the thing you wanted from the freight office, the wire. We got the rest of the message. It says—" The voice broke, startled by the shape of the square, by the gun held in a quiet woman's hand, by the town arranged like a question that had decided to grow teeth. Mireia turned her head by a finger's width, and no more. The ninth rider stumbled into the lantern light with a heavy satchel clutched in both hands. He was laughing the way boys laugh when they are relieved to have found adults, only to discover the adults had been replaced by a story. He lifted the satchel like a trophy and opened his mouth to shout the line he had memorized. "Don't," Sparrow said sharply, too late, to make it anything but a beautiful word. He shouted anyway. "It says the vulture riders didn't come alone." The square's breath went out like a candle in wind. Jace's head snapped toward the boy. Mireia's barrel did not move. Ezra's eyes shifted, the smallest fraction, to the black mouth of the alley where the new boots had been born. Out of that alley a figure stepped, as if it had been waiting to hear its cue spoken by a child. It was not a rider, and not a townsman, and not a marshal. And the shape of it had practiced patience until patience had learned manners. The figure's coat brushed Mireia's shoulder as it passed behind her. The figure lifted a hand with 2 fingers raised, as though ordering drinks. "Evening, Jace," the newcomer said, soft and curious, as if it had stopped to smell the wood smoke and liked what it found. Jace blinked, and then blinked again, like a man waking from a particular dream to find a different one standing in his bedroom with boots on. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. The figure smiled without showing teeth, and Mireia, for the first time since sundown, felt her pulse step wrong. "I'm the reason your wire was late," the newcomer said, and as the square leaned toward that voice, and as Jace Vargo's hand tilted ever so slightly toward his belt, and Alma's fingers seemed to forget that rifles were made to go off and not simply to be held, Mireia saw Ezra's eyes go hard as flint, and knew the next second would decide whether the night became a funeral or a mourning. She did the only thing left between those 2 doors. She stepped forward, put herself between the stranger and the sign, and drew a breath to say a word that might still change the room. What she saw as she opened her mouth, what she recognized in the stranger's hand and in the way Jace's shoulders tilted, made the word catch in her throat before it had a chance to live.
To live. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The stranger's hand held a length of green silk string, no thicker than a blade of grass, looped twice around 2 fingers, the way a patient angler coils a fly line while deciding where the water breaks. Mireia recognized the string because she owned its twin. The coil in the stranger's hand told a language only certain gun hands spoke, the language of draw checks and cylinder stops, of slack measured so precisely a breath could translate to distance. "Don't," she managed, but the word was hoarse and late. Jace's right shoulder sank a feather's width. The tilt told her everything. He was about to let pride drag his hand. The green string slid from the stranger's fingers, fell, and landed on dust as carefully as a prayer set on a dish. "Name's Morrow," the stranger said, not to Jace, but to the square, and his voice carried like water in a wooden pipe, muted, traveling, unstoppable. "I follow wires when they lie. Tonight's lied in 3 towns before it told the truth here." Jace laughed in a short burst. "Ha! You travel on other men's sentences?"
I traveled to keep towns from believing the worst word first, Morrow said, still mild. Seems we're late, but not useless. He raised his empty hand. Because I have a rule. I don't like to see names burned. Wood remembers, so do people. Marshal! Jace called lightly, without taking his eyes off Morrow. You collect strangers? First deliveryman who isn't, now a wire chaser with ribbons in his pocket. Man can arrive and not belong to you. Happens daily. Morrow's coat brushed Mireia again as he paced, unhurried, to her right, never crossing her line, never stealing her aim. She looked at the bay mare Thread, and his mouth softened as if at a good chord. Honest feet, he remarked. Good choice. Drink, Mireia said to Thread without moving her lips. The mare flicked an ear and lowered her head to the trough like they had planned it in the dark. Sparrow's gaze had fixed on the green string in the dust. Haven't seen one of those since the San Juan freight road. She had a man there who looped his like a rosary, shot coins from a gambler's knuckles at 20 paces, and then used the same hand to cut bread for his little sisters. Some hands learn 2 languages, Mireia said, keeping Jace on the front of her eyes, Morrow on the edges, the town in her pulse. Jace rolled his wrist. It made a small, irritated, brandy splash of motion in the lamplight. Enough sermons. The sign comes down. He jerked his chin. Called. Cross. The brothers set their shoulders. Morrow's head tilted, bird quick. Called, he said conversationally. If you pull with your left while your right's high, you'll wrench your bad collarbone. You don't want to be useless to your brother tomorrow when he needs you to lift the sack of corn you told the woman at the feed store you'd fetch. Called froze, as if a colder wind had walked through him. How? You wear the sling mark in summer the way men do when they keep using what ought to rest. Morrow's tone held no triumph, only a clean scalpel of noticing. Cross, your boot heel's worn on the outside. If you wrench while helping him, you'll go down and tear the seam Alma mended last week when you split it stepping off her stair. Alma snorted. He didn't say thank you, she announced. Cross flushed, the color of a man seen. Jace flared. We don't take town inventory from a ribbon man. He lifted a second match. I'll do it myself and be done. Jace, Sparrow said softly, and that single word carried a dozen others beneath it. Wait, look, listen. Don't make me watch you be smaller than you can be. He heard none of them. Flint rasped. Match flared. Mireia's barrel drew a quiet line in the dark. Don't, Morrow said to Jace, still gentle. You won't like the arithmetic of what comes next. I like sums I write, he replied, and reached. The bay mare raised her head, water dripping like glass beads on her whiskers. For a heartbeat, the square saw itself reflected, lamps, faces, night, hope, curved and inverted in the trembling drops. Mireia saw too, and, in seeing, counted. She did not shoot the flame this time. She shot the nail. The colt spoke once, and wood spat. The top right nail blew free, shaft clattering on the porch, as if trying to continue its life as a nail in some other, more kinder board. The sign sagged toward Jace's face. He flinched back by instinct, match hand snapped up to preserve heat. The flame hissed from the rush of his own motion, and died.
Silence, that generous beast, lay down over the square. Jace looked at the hole in the board, the absent nail, the living sign. He looked like a man instructed by a mountain. Then his ego found breath and chose anger as the air it recognized. That's twice, he said. Now we teach. He pointed at Ezra. Marshal, come here and kneel. You preside while your town meets its manners. Ezra didn't move. No. Jace flicked his fingers. 2 riders started forward, called and Cruss. Not because they were eager, but because long habit had made them, between them, the lever on which Jace liked to pry. They took 2 steps and stopped. Something unseen had seized their ankles. Not rope, not hand. Words. Called. Morea's voice did not rise. Your collarbone. Cruss, your seam. The brothers stood, arrested by the surprise of being remembered. Sparrow watched them, and in her eyes there was a flash of the seamstress she had named, how a line of thread can hold something together long enough for a mind to change. Jace's smile turned to salt. Sparrow, he said flatly, do it. Sparrow's mouth pressed into a white coin. Do what? Fire the straw. Make her choose between her barn and her sign. Sparrow flicked a glance at Maria, one woman to another, across a night that would be taller in memory than in the measure of the space it occupied. You doubt your lantern hooks with sand? She asked. Second barrel left of the door, Maria said. You water your aisle. 3 passes, Maria said. Sparrow nodded once, as if answering a question she had asked herself and had hoped would be answered yes. She scratched a match, lifted it, and blew it out. She dropped the dead stick into her coat pocket like a keepsake. I'll not light a place with honest feet, she said. Jace's eyes went winter hard. Then you break, he said simply, and aimed the back of his hand at her cheek. Maria didn't know she moved until after she had moved. The colt didn't speak. Her left hand did, open, fast, certain, catching Jace's wrist at the hinge where men are boys again. Her fingers closed, and pressure said the rest. No. His eyes widened, not at the stop, but at the fact of being touched without hate. Pride fell through him and grabbed fear on the way down. He jerked free. Enough, he snarled, and pulled his pistol. He was fast. Maria was truer. 2 shots braided in the air like ropes thrown from opposite banks to make a bridge. Jace's bullet kissed Maria's coat, a burning finger along her ribs that did not find skin. Maria's bullet kissed the ground an inch from Jace's toe and buried itself in dust where it could do the least it had to. The third sound was something like a sob inside a laugh, the jackrabbit boy's breath leaving him as he realized he hadn't died, hadn't killed, had only stood very still for the first time in months. Marshal, Morrow said quietly, not taking his eyes off Jace. I'll trouble your jail in a minute. For now, trouble your church bell. Ring it 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. That was the code where I grew up for bring water and stay home. People like codes. Makes them feel they belong to sense. Ezra moved, not because Morrow had told him, but because the shape of the suggestion fit the knight's logic. He took 2 strides, then stopped. The jackrabbit boy stood in his way, small and breakable, and determined to break something else in himself first. Let me do it, the boy whispered. Please. Careful. Ropes bite. I got bit by worse, the boy answered, and ran. The bell spoke as the boy asked it to. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. A few townsfolk vanished from the edges of the square like thoughts reconsidered. Others returned from doorways with buckets and blankets. A woman handed a dipper to Barlow without asking his name. He drank and passed it along and did not understand why his hands were shaking until he realized they were not. They only remembered they could.
Jace stood, gun still in hand, and measured the new room. Not his stage, not his crowd, not his script. His pupils shrank to the size of seeds in the sudden awareness of lack. He lifted his chin as men do when they mean to reach for dignity by lunging and hope their fingers get there before their mouth. Last chance, he said to Mireia. Put the gun down. Come kneel, say the town is mine. She thought of the trunk. Canvas, oil, wings worn by a thumb's faith. She thought of the letters beneath the loose board, the weeds pressed flat into forever, the child's careful loops, and the words that made pictures of small lives learning to be large.
She thought of Ezra's old scar, and Alma's broom-held rifle, and Sparrow's kept match. "No," she said. The refusal had no edge. It lay flat on the dust, like a plank across a narrow stream, asking men to find their balance and go on. Jace fired. The bullet took the lantern on the left and showered the doorway with stars that died as they touched the watered threshold. Darkness reached in, greedy, and the barn gave up one aisle to its hand. Horses shifted. Soft thunder. Thread tossed her head, and then settled because Morea's voice followed the bullet with a word that held and was meant to hold. Easy. Morrow stepped then. He did not draw. He did not posture. He walked, hands visible, until he was 3 long steps from Jace and 1 short from Sparrow. He bent and picked up the green string as if reclaiming an address he had dropped in the dirt. "You can shoot 1 more lamp, and then you'll have your dark. In that dark, you'll be blind to more things than you can afford. Your men, your horses, your exit. She won't." He nodded at Mireia. "She lives in barns. Barn dark is her home." Jace's mouth twitched. "You play music with fear. You want me to hear all the wrong notes at once." "I want you to hear the world," Morrow said simply. "It's trying to talk you out of your worst self." "Marshal," a voice called from the bank's side window. It was Josiah, breathless. "Back alley, 3 more, look like they belong to the first ones." Jace's face eased for the first time since the nail fell. Relief, eager and raw, ran through him like a boy released from chores. He laughed, real, reckless. "Hear that, string man? The song changes. We brought a chorus." He lifted his gun, not toward a lamp, but toward Ezra. "Chase," Sparrow said, not sharp this time, broken. He fired again. And that was when the barn, the square, the town, and the night remembered they could move. Mireia marked the path of the pistol the way a hawk marks a mouse in tall dry. She did not aim for Jace's hand, she aimed for where his hand would be after recoil. Her second shot took the backstrap and peeled it out of his palm as neat as a stitch ripped by a seam ripper that had read the cloth it worked. The gun spun and landed near the trough with a sad, wet clack. Ezra flinched, not from fear, but from the creak in his thigh's old wound reminding him of the cost of standing. He stood anyway. From the alley, the 3 newcomers burst into view and saw a map no one had drawn for them. Their leader disarmed, a woman with a gun at the sign, a town arranged like a jury, a stranger with ribbon and patience, a marshal who didn't kneel, and Sparrow with a dead match in her pocket. They hesitated inside the threshold of that map, as men do when they realize the legend they expected has been rewritten while they were writing. "Hold," Morrow said to them, quiet as a resting hand. "Don't make your feet learn something your head will grieve." One of the 3, older with a cautious jaw, heard the sentence that had been waiting at the back of his own mind and stopped. The second was too young to hear anything but his own pulse. He lifted his gun and looked around for an enemy to fit it. The third looked at Sparrow and put his gun down like a man putting down a baby he didn't realize he had been carrying wrong. Jace lunged for the trough gun. Mireia moved to cut the angle. She did not need to be faster. She needed to be right by a finger's width. She was. Her heel found the nail head she herself had hammered into the door rail 5 years ago, and used as a private measure of distance from fear. She pivoted on that point. The Colt sketched a short, final arc that ended with its sight not at Jace's heart, and not at his head, but at the knuckle of his thumb where heat ends and decisions begin. "Don't," she said,
A third time, and in the word was a plea pulled very tight over a prayer. Jace looked up at her. For the first time, the knight put his actual age on his face. He was younger than his cruelty wanted to be, and older than his bones deserved. He breathed, and the breath told on him, the little flutter that says a man has begun to count and has arrived at a number he does not recognize as belonging to him. "Boss?" the jackrabbit boy whispered. "Please." Jace shut his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed in their water. He straightened, hands empty, chin up in the dignity of surrender that wishes it were bravery.
"Fine," he said. "We'll call this one yours." He half smiled at Maria with a hatred that had found a mirror and didn't like what it saw. But mirrors break. He looked past her at the sign, as if to memorize the way the gold leaf had thinned not into absence, but honesty. "Marshal," he called, "arrest me like a story." Ezra did not move at once, because he had been law long enough to know that endings are the most dangerous part of nights. He waited to see if the room believed itself. The young newcomer with the fast hands set his jaw on the wrong teeth and twitched, but Sparrow touched his wrist, just a touch, and his fingers forgot they possessed triggers. "Keld, cross," Jace said, suddenly very weary. "Don't do anything brave. I am tired of your graves in my mind." They lowered their hands and kept their eyes on the dust, which is the closest some men come to prayer. Ezra crossed the square. He cuffed Jace with motions so respectful they cut. He passed the second set of irons to Alma without looking, and she snapped them on the twin brothers like tying aprons before dawn. "Marshal," Morrow's voice stayed level. "If you've a cell with a window, give it to the boy." "What boy?" Ezra asked. "The one who learned stillness," Morrow said. The jackrabbit stare found him and widened. "You catch a man in the moment he becomes someone else. You give him a view. Helps him keep going." He nodded. "We'll find him a window." Maria lowered the Colt. The weight left her hand like a bucket set down after a long walk. Her ribs stung where Jace's bullet had kissed the coat. She didn't look down. She didn't look at the sign. She looked at the town and saw how it had arranged itself without orders. Buckets at the ready, blankets over shoulders, children asleep on steps because their parents had learned how to stand a long time and still carry what was fragile. "Water your horses," she told the riders not yet in irons. "Then go. If you come back, come with your hands in your hands and a name you're willing to answer to." No one laughed. A few nodded, the tight, embarrassed nods men make when their bodies agree before their pride is asked. Sparrow remained by the door. She watched Maria as one watching herself in a window sees both inside and out at once. "You kept wood. I owe you a match." "Keep it," Maria replied. "I may need to borrow it another night for light." Sparrow smiled, faint and real. "If I light anything for you, it will be your way home when your feet don't remember." "You leaving?" Maria asked. Sparrow looked at Jace, ironed, chin set, a boy's weariness under a man's posture. "Tonight," she said, "soon as I put a horse between me and the worst of myself." "Come back with your hands empty. We always need help in haying." Sparrow tucked the matchbook deeper into her coat like a promise hidden among bones. "I've got a seam to learn again," she said. "Might my hands remember." The square unstiffened by degrees, like a field after wind. Ezra and Alma marched Jace, Keld, and Cross towards the jail. The three who'd come late, one resolved, one uncertain, one young, drifted at the edges of decision. The jackrabbit boy walked to keep pace with Ezra without knowing why.
Morrow stood still and looked at Maria as if deciding which part of the night to hand back to her first. "Why the string?" she asked. He twined it again around 2 fingers and held up the coil. "It slows me down," he said. "I'm fast when I shouldn't be. This," he wiggled the loop, "puts a thought between me and proving it." "You used to prove things?" "Still do, just different ones." He looked past her at the stole that never rented. "You keep a trunk under blankets. You didn't oil that gun for 5 years, and yet it worked like rain. Means you have a habit a lot of men don't. Care without display." Maria almost smiled. "You diagnose like a doctor who quit medicine to read telegraph lies." "That's not far wrong," he said. "My first trade was listening to hearts. Men stopped letting me. Wires started to." Horses snorted. The square thinned. The church bell hung silent, a big, satisfied throat. Maria felt the night let go of its hold on the town and turn its face toward the long, ordinary hours between this and dawn.
"Stay," Ezra called tomorrow from halfway to the jail. "We'll need statements until paper forgets how to be scared." "I'll stay," Morrow said. But his eyes hadn't left Maria. "If I may water my horse in the honest trough." "You may," she said. "Thread's done making men be better than they planned." They stood for a while like that, 2 figures in a doorway under a sign with a hole in its corner, and a town resetting its breath. In the livery's quiet, the pigeons resumed their low, conversational griefs. Thread sighed. The straw warmed back toward the smell of sleep. "You knew where he would move," Morrow said finally. "Jace, I knew where the worst part of him would. Worst parts are predictable. It's the better ones you have to account for slowly." "You good at slow," he said. "I practice," she said, and at last she let her left hand find the inside of her coat where the graze burned. She touched the line and winced. When she brought her fingers up, there was no blood. The bullet had scissored cloth and spared her. It was a mean mercy. She'd prefer one with manners next time. Morrow noticed the wince without making a memorial of it. "I carry salve, not for bullets, for wires that take skin when you're fool enough to grab them. It helps with either." "You can leave it," she said. "I'll pay you back when the Ridge forgets to throw bandits at us for a week. I'll take payment in coffee and 1 story." She nodded. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," he echoed, and went to water his horse, leaving the string looped on the livery desk like a borrowed word in a dictionary someone had left open. Morning brought the color of tin to the sky and the taste of first rain to the town's teeth. The sign still hung, cocked at one corner where the nail had turned honest by leaving. Maria stood on a stool with a new nail between her lips. In her palm lay a thin strip of leather she'd cut from a ruined rein. She would set it under the nailhead as washer to keep wood from remembering hurt too quick. "Old?" she asked, and Alma's steady hands braced the sign's bottom edge. "I always did," she said. Maria set the nail and tapped it with small, respectful blows. When the head kissed down onto the leather, a contented little thud rose into her bones. "Looks like it grew there," Alma said. "It did," Maria replied. Across the square, Ezra and Morrow came from the jail together at a pace that said nothing surprised them enough to make them rush before coffee. Morrow carried a ledger and had ink on a knuckle, his own bruised to match Gus's. Ezra had the look of a man who had slept in a chair because the chair had work to do that would have gone undone if he had left it alone. "He confessed to half the wrong things," Ezra said as greeting. "Which half?" Alma asked. "The half that sounded like a better story, which is always the worst half." Morrow opened the ledger. He said, and I quote without flourish, "She shot the fire to death. It will do for the diamond papers. It won't do for truth. Truth is slower, but it lasts." Maria climbed down and wiped her hands. "What of the others?"
The boy with the window is sleeping under it. Sparrow is gone, left before dawn, took nothing that wasn't hers, left something that wasn't. He held out a small paper-wrapped bundle. Inside lay a thimble, old pewter, dented. The dent looked like a note held and not quite sung. She said you'd know what it's for, Ezra said. Maria turned the thimble in her palm. It fit the tip of her left ring finger like a promise that decided to sit down a while. For mending, she said. Always is, Alma replied. Called and cross? Ezra asked. Arguing about who goes first, to confession or to breakfast. I told them breakfast forgives quicker. They're considering the theology. And Jace. Ezra's jaw set, then loosened because he trusted the company he was in to hold what he was putting down. He's quieter than his legend. Men get that way when they notice their legend won't answer them back. Morrow shut the ledger on a sigh. He asked 2 questions I liked. One was whether wood remembers what we say to it when we nail it. The other was what a town does with a man who tried to make it kneel and then chose not to shoot when it could kill. Town feeds him, after he works. And he works. Maria touched the new leather washer under the nail head. Town lets him hammer something straight. Justice? Ezra asked.
You need signatures, she said. He nodded. And a statement, if you've coined for the time. I'll pay after the noon feed, she said. Sit. If you spill ink on my desk, I'll make you sand it smooth after. He sat. He did not spill. He wrote as she spoke, and he did not interrupt. Not once. Not even to rearrange the order of a sentence. When she finished, he lifted the papers and held them with his thumb against his palm as if each page had weight beyond its grammar. You left something out, he said quietly. I did, she answered. You left your own name out of the part where you shot the fire to death. I wasn't the important noun, she said. The fire was, and the wood. He smiled, and the smile put 10 years back on his face. You'll make a poor dime novel, he said. God keep you that way. Outside, a cry rose, a different cry. The surprised, delighted shout of a boy who has been handed a loaf still warm and finds his own name written in flour on top. The jackrabbit boy's laughter followed. Less jackrabbit now, more boy. Go, Ezra said to Mireya, nodding toward the sound. Let him see your sleeves unbuttoned, once. She looked down at her cuffs. The left patch hid under a neat fold. She had not unbuttoned in daylight since before Brimstone Ford learned the shape of her name. She said, No, but I'll roll them when we stack hay. He can learn the lesson without seeing the scar. Ezra stood. Church at sundown for a hearing, he said. We'll seat him where he can see the window. You seat where you can see the door. I always do, she answered. The church smelled like old wood and new decisions. It filled with people who had fed each other breakfast and were ready now to feed each other judgment if it could be made into bread. Alma sat near the aisle with her rifle leaning against her shin like a friend that listened more than it spoke. Gus had ink on both hands and on his cheek, and he wore it like pride. The jackrabbit boy sat under the window with a cup of water he sipped as if it had chosen him. Ezra stood at the front. He did not mount the pulpit. He stood on the floor with the people and made his voice be theirs by remembering how they sounded when they were tired. Jace Vargo is charged with cruelty, coercion, attempted arson, assault with a firearm, reckless endangerment, conspiracy, and stupidity. He let the last word sit. It shifted and settled into something harder than a jest. I add the last because it's how men get to the others. We're going to cure it first. Murmurs, the kind that say a town wants to be generous and needs permission if it could be made into bread. Jace stood between Called and Cross, with his wrists bound and his head high. He looked like a man trying on his best suit after losing weight. "You may speak," Ezra said. Jace took a breath. He let it out. "I thought I was owed a story. I thought the world should ring a bell for me when I rode in because I taught it my name by scratching it on things that couldn't answer. He jerked his chin at Mireia, shot the fire off me and left me nothing but myself. That's not a compliment, but it might be the first true thing I've held in my hands in a long time." "You ask for mercy?" Ezra asked. Jace smiled with one side of his mouth. "I ask for work." "You'll have it," Alma called, not waiting for legal form. "You'll muck stalls, and you'll carry water, and you'll walk fence until your shadow knows the posts by their first names." Gus stood. "He'll copy psalm lines at my desk until his handwriting remembers how to be less cruel. Mine learned." Barlow lifted a hand. "I'll teach him to listen to a team that isn't scared of him," he offered. "They pull straighter for a man who doesn't pull them." The jackrabbit boy rose without meaning to. "Can I—" He swallowed. "Can I bring him bread once, so he knows something can arrive warm and not burn him?" Sparrow's thimble was in Mireia's pocket. She touched it and then spoke. "You'll work here until we can send you to the circuit judge with a piece of paper that says you learned repair. You'll leave with a scar that behaves. You'll come back when the bridge plank you hammered holds weight without splinter." "What if he runs?" someone asked, from the back where fear likes to stand. "Then he runs," Ezra said. "And when another wire lies and a stranger follows it with ribbon on 2 fingers, we'll know what kind of town we were when we had a chance to be what our sign says."
Jace bowed his head, just a little, and the motion made a place on his neck shine pale where a rope had kissed in some other time he had talked his way out of stupidity and into breath. The hearing did not end with applause. It ended with assignments. Men and women came forward with chores the way they come forward with casseroles when death visits. Practical, loving, a declaration that grief will not set its own table. Mireia watched the lists lengthen and saw the town make itself by saying who would carry what. After, on the church steps, the sky laid its copper hand on the rooftops and the swallow stitched air. Morrow was gone. The river sounded like someone washing a pan with care. Sparrow had left a second gift, a spool of thread in the pour box, bright green. "Wear it," Alma advised, tapping Mireia's pocket where the thimble sat. "I am," Mireia said, and she was, in the way a woman wears permission when she decides not to need it. Night came soft and stayed. The square did not invite menace. Lights burned in windows like eyes that had learned to watch without flinching. Mireia banked the livery lamps and wrote the day's ledger by the softer light of a stub of candle. She listed coins in and out. She wrote Jace Fargo's name in a new column headed Debt Work, and under it, in smaller hand, she wrote a single word, Repair. She added the jackrabbit boy as a note, window, bread, breathing. She set down the pencil and closed her eyes and found under her lids the exact moment when the match died and the nail fell and the sign hung crooked but still spelled what it meant. She breathed into that memory and felt to become a hinge, not a wound. A sound at the alley door. 2 fingers on wood, patient, the exact rhythm she used on the trunk when counting breath to decision. She did not turn. "You Moro," she said. Or a ghost that learned to introduce itself, he answered from the door. "You left," she said. "I did," he said. "The wire argued. I told it to wait." "What did it say?" "That you were done needing me," he said. "I told it wires don't know how to measure need." "You want coffee?" she said. "I do," he admitted. "And one story." She poured.
She told him about the San Pedro winter when a horse learned to open a latch with its lips, and how she fixed the habit by teaching it a better trick instead of slapping the first one out of it. He listened, shoulders down. The pigeons spoke in the rafters. The horses chewed like contented machines making hay into patience. "What's your story?" she asked when she had finished. He tied the green string between two chair posts and plucked it gently. It sang a note like a hair in a bow. He said, "I left a town once when I should have stayed. Thought the worst thing I could do was be needed. Learned later it is sometimes the best. I'm trying to study that lesson by repetition." "You'll fail some," she said. "I will," he said. "Will you keep wood? "Every day," she said. He nodded. "Then we'll call that passing." He stood. He did not touch her, and the absence was its own courtesy. "Sleep," he said. She almost laughed. "I sleep like a barn," she said. "Some parts of me always wake. Let the part that mends rest. It does better with light." He went. She waited until the sound of his horse on the back path braided itself into river. Then she banked the last lantern and walked to the back stall that never rented. She opened the trunk. She set the colt inside with its muzzle to the hinge. She laid the green string atop it. She closed the lid and sat with her palms on it until the smell of oil agreed to share the room with sleep. Wind shifted. The town breathed. Somewhere a dog barked twice the way dogs do when they have seen a shadow remember it is only a shade. Maria lay down on the narrow cot in the tack room. She left the door ajar, the way a woman leaves her heart to a place she has decided to love as it is. She dreamed not of guns, not of fires, not of men needing to be stopped, but of a sign with a leather washer beneath its nail and of the good thud a hammer makes when it tells wood and metal to be friends. She woke at dawn to the sound of hoofbeats given permission. Ezra's knock followed them, a single, sturdy sound. "Morning," he said when she opened the door. "Morning," she returned. "We've got a problem." "Of course we do," she said. "Step aside. Gesture in." He laid a folded bulletin on her desk. High up above the careful loop of her ledger hand and the green string, ink shouted without courtesy,
To carry next. Morrow's voice took the barn in a steady hand, the way a good farrier takes a hoof, firm, calm, explaining each touch so the animal doesn't flinch at the sound of kindness. By order of the Circuit Judge for the Upper Territories, and under the authority delegated to the undersigned agents of the Federal Marshal Service, be it known that towns maintaining standing agreements of rehabilitation in lieu of immediate sentence may, upon testimony of a sworn marshal and 2 credible witnesses, retain custody of offenders until such time as a circuit court may sit. The condition is work suited to repair. The seal affixed here is iron for a reason. When law is carried on bad roads, we make it hard to melt. He tipped the letter toward the light. The iron seal swung and clicked, a small, confident sound. Deputy Hollis's smile didn't disappear so much as it shrank to fit the truth without tearing. "That letter's dated 2 seasons back," he said smoothly. "My warrant is this month." "Turn the page," Morrow suggested, patient as a schoolmaster. He did it himself when the deputy didn't. Addendum. In cases where the offender has shown unambiguous restraint in the presence of the court of the people, that is, a gathered town, authority to retain is strengthened. He looked up. This town has quite a court. Eyes shifted, not to the deputy, not to Morrow, but to Maria, whose palm still rested over the ledger over the words she'd written in a smaller hand than most people used for hope. Deputy Hollis laughed, but the barrel lid sound had a dent in it now. "Cousin," he said, picking up the warrant and tapping it on the desk like a metronome, "you ever were a reader? You ever learn the other half? Ink dries crooked when men with soft spines hold the paper. I'll take him now and argue later. That's the order of the world." "No," Ezra said simply. Not in this one. The deputy misheard the single-syllable word as invitation to shout. "I am circuit!" he thundered. "And I am town," Maria said, not raising her voice. "And this is wood." She tapped the desk with the thimble. The sound had more authority than the deputy's shout because it belonged to weight, not volume. He leaned in, breath scything the green string so it trembled. "You'd choose your patched sign over blood? Over pride. Blood can be taught. Pride pretends it already knows." Jace Vargo, who had stood very still as men moved law around him like furniture, spoke without lifting his head. "Deputy," he said, "I'll go if she says the bridge won't hold me." The deputy blinked, surprised to be consulted by a man he'd come to claim as object. "You'll go if I say," he corrected. He considered. "I tried living that sentence. It made me smaller." The barn held a shared breath. Outside, the day slid further into itself. Hammer blows, morning voices, the hush of a river deciding to keep its banks. Deputy Hollis's hand moved. Not to his gun, to his hat brim, a small, thoughtless gesture he had learned as a boy to remind himself where his face stopped and the world began. "Are you going to bar the door, Maria?" he asked, almost conversational now, as if both of them stood on the porch of a hot Sunday and were discussing the weather like it hadn't chosen anyone yet. "Are you going to point that old toy at family?" "I don't point guns at family. I point names." "Then call mine," he challenged. She did. Quiet, accurate, unkind insofar as truth refuses to dress for parties. "You're the boy who spun a tin star on a string and made children clap at dusk. You're the man who grew into the spin and forgot to look down to see if his feet knew where they were. You are Hollis. You forgot what the name paid for." She tapped the sign again, once. "You forgot wood." His nostrils flared. "I brought iron." Morrow lifted the iron seal. "On our side of the ledger, unless you have one heavier." Deputy Hollis could have laughed. He could have raged. He did neither. He walked to the door and spoke to his men. "Hold," he said. They did. The word belonged to a tone they had been trained to obey. He came back, set both palms on the desk, and leaned over the ledger until his shadow cut Maria's hands in half. "You claim custody. Keep it. But know this. If your bridge fails, if your little grammar collapses, the river writes the next sentence with bodies. I'll be downstream ready to read it to you until you can't stand the sound." He smiled once last, this one smaller and realer. "Good," Alma called from the door, because she had appeared the way women appear when someone is about to say something they should have had to pay for with better manners. "Coffee's on. It's awful. You can learn humility while you gag." Something eased that wasn't the deputy. It was the barn, recognizing that a storm might move along the ridge without setting its hay alight.
Ezra's voice was iron. Down. Maria didn't fall. She slid. There is a difference. Falling belongs to fear. Sliding belongs to decision. She slid under the truss and looked through the narrow diamond the braces made. She saw the muzzle flash for the third shot and counted backward. Distance, wind, the rifle's anger. She did not reach for the Colt. She reached for the thimble. The third round cracked. The thimble took the splinter that would have put a ragged kiss in her knuckle. She didn't curse. She paid attention. Wood told her where the breath had come from. Morrow, who had not dropped, but had lowered himself into a crouch the way water lowers when it needs to carry more weight, looked at her and nodded. The same trees, the same angle. "Deputy," Alma hissed. "No," Ezra said grimly, already moving the townsfolk back by word, no hands. "Deputy doesn't shoot from trees. He sends a paper." "Who then?"
Gus demanded from under his ledger, which he had inexplicably brought into danger because clerks sometimes believe testimony can stop bullets if written beautifully enough. Men who like to test rope before they know who's tying the knot, Morrow said. Hold still. The fourth shot came faster. It took a grazing bite from the old oak beam, like a rat sampling a loaf. Maria hissed, not from fear, from anger, at waste, at men who carved their names into things without learning how to repair. "Where?" the jackrabbit boy whispered, his hand finding the plank like a prayer finds a pew. "There," Maria breathed, and as she said it, a figure broke from the cottonwoods, not firing now, running, rifle in hand, hat low, coat flaring, not deputy's men, not Jace's last three, a different wrong. Two more followed. "Bridge!" Ezra shouted. "Hold!" Men on the bank raised hunting pieces. Alma lifted the broom rifle and spat like a cat before swatting a snake with the back of a hand. "Lower," she advised the sky. "I don't like shooting God by accident." The first runner hit the near bank at a speed that would have thrown him if the bank had been honest. It was. He kept his feet. He sprinted for the span. "Don't," Maria called. The word reached him with the force of an invisible hand. He hesitated, confused, the pause of a man not used to being addressed by sentences that don't end with his name. "We can hold you." And in that one verb was the whole quarry of what bridges are for. He snarled, lifted the rifle, and found her through the braces. He recognized the coat and the sleeves. He didn't recognize the woman who wore them. He fired. Mariah drew and shot in a motion that was mostly breath and a little math. The bullet didn't find him. It found the rifle's rear sight and took it away like a rude child takes a toy from a worse child. Metal pinged. The man cursed, startled to be unarmed by a lesson and not a wound. "Cross," Maria said, already moving. "Tree nail." He passed her one not understanding, then did because her hand named the use. She jammed the peg through the trestle's hole above the runner's momentum path, slammed it home, and as he hit the span, she hooked the loop of the green string over the peg and around the man's wrist in one smooth reach even she didn't know she'd been practicing toward. He jerked. The string held. He went to his knees, stunned by restraint without blood. The second runner skidded to a stop at that sight. The third turned, wiser for someone else's bruise. "Down!" Ezra barked again, and the second runner complied because certain voices return men to childhood where obedience meant supper. On the far bank, a bigger shape moved. A horseman, tall, bad coat fine, badge winking. "Deputy," Ezra said, relieved and annoyed in the same breath, late as promised. Deputy Hollis rode down without hurry. He took in the scene with a glance that measured where the story had put its verbs. He dismounted and walked to the man caught by Morrow's string and Maria's nail. He crouched, assessed the knot without touching it. "Good hold," he said neutrally. "Teaches without breaking." He looked up at his cousin. "Are you going to take work from me if I offer it?" She said, "Depends if you mean work or trick." He grunted what might have been a laugh. Trick would be to shoot him. Work is to teach him to walk this bridge without thinking it's a stage. He stood and addressed the captured man. "You came to test rope. Congratulations, it holds. Now you'll learn to set pegs until you understand why we do." "Under whose order?" He spat. "Mine." And then, after a fractional beat, "And hers." He tipped his hat at Maria. The brim pointed where respect goes when it's still learning. By dusk, the men from the cottonwoods had learned the shape of mallets and why tree nails prefer straight holes. By full dark, the town had crossed and recrossed the finished span, until the bridge forgot it had ever been a question and became a fact, whispered into River, until River repeated it back.
Deputy Hollis straightened, took his paper, and, without waiting for permission, set it gently on top of Maria's ledger. For a breath, law and repair shared the same page. Then he turned for the door. "Cousin," he said, half turning back, "next time I'd bring a rope." "Bring two,"
Maria said evenly. "You'll need one for pride." He laughed, and this time the dent made a better sound. He left. The barn exhaled. The pigeons approved. Thread bumped Maria's shoulder with a soft, reprimanding nose that said, "You could have watered me first." Ezra let his weight finally come to rest against the jam and rubbed his thigh where old Hertz sang when the weather argued. "We have a day, maybe 2. Judge sits in 3. "What do we do with him?" Alma asked, voice brisk to hide what it wanted to tremble for. "Jace and his 2 pieces of furniture." She meant called and Cross, with a dryness that made Cross smile, startled to be furniture and not a tool. Maria looked toward the square where the bridge at the ford lay like a sentence the town had been writing plank by plank since spring. It was near finished, lacked only the center span, the one that made all the others either meaningful or decorative. "We build," she said. "We test, we trust wood. We make strength visible so men who think only iron counts learn to count with both hands." By midday, Brimstone Ford turned itself into a grammar lesson for the deputy's threat. Men and women carried planks to the river, set them, measured, checked, and hammered. Ezra kept the ledger of lengths and widths, standing on the bank with a pencil behind his ear and a patience that had earned him a harder scar than the bullet ever had. Alma ran the line at the far abutment, calling cadence that made timid hands bolder and bold hands careful. Gus documented and forgot to get ink on anything but paper, which made him vaguely unhappy. Jace Vargo carried wood. He did not do it like penance. He did it like a man learning a tool he had despised because it didn't sing his name back to him when he pressed. Called and Cross worked 1 plank ahead, shoulders sunk to the habit. The jackrabbit boy, windowed, breaded, finding shape, brought tree nails in an apron Alma had sewn too quickly to be beautiful and exactly quickly enough to be necessary. Morrow stood mid-span, feet spread on 2 joists, reading the way the river talked against piers. He spoke when needed, which was rarely. When he did, men leaned because the note he found with his voice made their work stay in tune. Maria set wedges and drove tree nails with a mallet whose handle was polished by years of hands that had never asked a poster to applaud them. Her sleeves remained buttoned. Her coat was off. The grays along her ribs tugged when she lifted, and each tug told her she was alive. She listened and respected it, and did not let it name the day. "Hold!" Alma called. "Test!" They tested by walking 3 abreast across the completed spans. The wood talked back. Small, good creaks, the intimate conversation of fibers settling into a new idea of themselves. "Again," Ezra said. "From the far side back." They did. On the return, a joist hummed wrong under Maria's foot. Too bright, the sound of a string tightened beyond pitch. "Stop," she said, and her word carried because even people who didn't like being told what to do trusted breath that wasn't wasted on volume. She knelt, ear to plank. "There!" She tapped with the mallet, found the hollow where the tree nail had seated shy. "Cross!" He stepped forward, uneasy. "You make the fix," she said. "It'll remember your hand." He swallowed, wiped his palm on his trousers, and set the tree nail. His first blow glanced. Maria didn't correct him. The second landed true. The sound deepened, a note into chord. Cross looked up like a man at a baptism, unbelieving and wet with grace. "Again," Ezra said softly, meaning both the strike and the learning. Cross obeyed. The bridge held. "Why a bridge?" the jackrabbit boy asked no one and everyone. "Why not just stay on our sides?" "Because rivers change their minds," Morrow said, "and you want to be there when they do." By late afternoon, Brimstone Ford stood like a sentence almost complete, lacking only the period that tells a reader where to breathe. Ezra set his pencil down. Alma put her hand in the small of her back and announced that if God had meant women to stand on river rock all day, he would have put flatter stones under rivers. Maria ran a palm along the last plank's edge and felt the fuzz of fresh saw. "One more," she said. "For the center, it should come from the old mill oak. It knows about weight." Barlow trotted off with a team and returned, dragging a beam that slept in shade and remembered labor. They wrestled it into place. The sky turned the color of tin again, then slowly to coin. Swallows stitched the air. "Test," Ezra said for the last time. Maria stepped onto the span with Jace and the boy. Called and Cross followed, Alma and Gus. Ezra, leg protesting, set his foot and made it know it wasn't in charge. Morrow stayed in the center, hands light on the truss top, eyes on the river like a man watching a story decide if it wants to be tragic or not. They walked. The beam spoke. It said, "Yes." "Again," Maria said, "because habits don't become themselves without repetition." They turned. That was when a rifle cracked from the cottonwoods on the far bank. The sound was a new grammar, one that wanted to end all sentences. A chip blew from the beam near Maria's boot. Men flinched. The second shot took a splinter from the truss upright by Morrow's ear.
They lit lanterns along the rail, not as ward, as welcome. People stood in pairs and tens and listened to boards quiet. Children ran back and forth until their feet taught their mouths to laugh at the right moments again. Alma leaned on the rail with Ezra and argued about whether the far post needed one more brace. Gus wrote a sentence so pretty about light on water that he forgot to save it from the wind. The page flew, and he didn't mind. Jace Vargo stood apart, hands empty, eyes full, his name smaller inside him than it had been that morning, and therefore more his. Mireya walked halfway across and stopped. She set her palm on the center beam. The wood was warm from day and cool from water and right from being asked to do something possible. Morrow came to stand beside her, quiet as a clause inserted where it would do the least harm and the most good. He tapped the rail. "Holds," he said. "It does," she said. "You going to keep 'em all?" he asked, glancing toward the jail where men with mistakes were learning beds that didn't move and air that didn't demand a name at gunpoint. "No," she said. "I'm going to keep the lesson. The men will keep themselves if they decide they like the sound." Morrow nodded. He watched the river. "Wire says the judge sits a day early," he announced, as easily as he might have said the moon would rise. "Came clean. Maybe it learned manners from the last conversation." "You going?" she asked. "I'll sit," he said. "Then I'll go when the night needs me more than you do." She smiled a little. "You talk like a man who has practiced leaving with his boots in his hand so he doesn't wake anyone." "I have," he admitted. "I'm trying to practice staying loud enough that the right people don't mistake it for the wrong kind of quiet." "Morrow," she said, and the name fit him a little better when she spoke it like that, a promise that there would be another day and he'd still be expected to be in it. Why the iron seal? Because men like the deputy prefer metal to wood. Iron looks like certainty, wood looks like work. But iron rusts and wood grows. He touched the rail. I wanted him to see the difference in his hand. "You think he did?" "I think his hat brim lowered for the right reason once today. That's a first step for men who measure themselves in height." They stood with that for a while. Night braided itself through lantern light in long, patient loops. Someone started a hymn and forgot the second verse and laughed and hummed the rest. The jackrabbit boy fell asleep sitting upright on a plank and didn't fall because Cross sat down beside him and lent him a shoulder. "Tell me something," Morrow said. "The trunk. You set the muzzle to the hinge.
so it looks the right way when I open the lid, so it remembers it's a tool that points toward work and not away from it. Good habit, he murmured. Better than yours, she teased, soft. He dipped his head in graceful guilt. I'm learning. He glanced toward the square. Deputy sitting kinder than his badge tonight. Badges behave better after coffee, Alma observed, materializing with 3 tin cups, one of which was cruelty to beans and kindness to conversation. She handed one to Morrow, one to Mireya, kept one for herself. Judge sits at dawn if Gus's wire is to be believed. I taught it to spell, Gus announced, from nowhere, proud. Dawn brought the judge, a woman with a black traveling coat and a face like a ledger. Each line a record, each record balanced, the whole carried without flinching. She convened under the church eaves because courtrooms have to be where people already know how to listen. Ezra presented. Alma testified in sentences so clear they could have been cut with a chisel. Gus offered ink. The jackrabbit boy stood and said, I stood, and sat, and it was enough. Cowled and Cross confessed to the part of their hands that belonged to will and not to habit. Jace spoke last. I wanted to be a fire and found I was just a match. She, he nodded at Mireya, shot the match. I didn't like the sound. I'll learn to like it. The judge looked at the sign. It hangs crooked, she observed. It hangs honest, Mireya replied. The judge's mouth decided to be a smile and then reconsidered and became the idea of one. Custody retained, she pronounced. Work assigned. Sentence pending repair. Deputy, you'll sign it. Deputy Hollis signed. He didn't argue. The iron of the other seal had left a mark on his palm. He hadn't washed it off. He noticed it now and didn't hide his hand. Marshal, the judge said, you'll see that the lesson remains a lesson and doesn't become a game. I will, Ezra said. Mireya Hollis, you keep a barn. I keep wood, Mireya said.
Keep doing it, the judge told her. Men mistake maintenance for smallness. It's the other way around. She closed her ledger. Court stood. The town didn't cheer. It breathed. The sound was deeper than joy. Relief carried at least as much work. The days that followed didn't dress as apologues. They put on work clothes. Jace carried water until his wrists learned the quarter turn that saves a bucket handle from biting. He mucked stalls and discovered humility smells like ammonia before it smells like hay. Called and Cross repaired a fence and learned to argue in lower voices. The jackrabbit boy learned names, starting with the horses because animals teach without changing their minds. Deputy Hollis rode the perimeter with Ezra and didn't insist Beline move just because his badge wanted to shine in a different light. Sparrow returned at dusk 3 days later with a spool of thread the color of sky after rain. For your sign, she said, if it needs to be mended pretty one day and not just strong. She showed Mireya the hems she'd sewn in a town west of the ridge. My hands remembered, she reported, pride shy. They always do, Mireya said. Morrow left and came back and left again, because wires still lied, and he had fashioned a life out of arguing them into decency. Each time he arrived, he touched the rail, breathed like a man stepping into shade, and stayed long enough to help set a beam or calm a cult spooked by thunder on the horizon. He and Mireya spoke in a language that didn't need to be married to be true. It had nouns like wood and water and work, and verbs like hold and mend and carry and say. Sometimes it had a stranger's name shaped into it softly enough that the stranger could hear it through a door and recognize himself without being summoned. Alma's coffee didn't improve. People kept drinking it anyway. Gus got better at letting pretty sentences fly away. Ezra's limp reminded him there were nights he would not outrun, and he didn't try. Deputy Hollis came by on the morning the bridge bore its first freight wagon. He watched it roll, slow, creaking, proud, and tipped his hat to the sign on the livery. I'll write it up, he told Mireya. The right way.
Write it for wood, not for men. He nodded like a cousin, finally willing to admit a sibling might have been right about one small thing once. You ever unbutton those cuffs? He asked, not lewd, curious, remembering the girl who refused to show off for boys with plates and laughter. When there's hay, she said. Then I'll come stack, he answered. It was an apology with work in it. She accepted it because apologies without work are stories told to barrels. The bridge held. The town held. Marea's ribs healed and forgot their lessons slowly, which is the only right speed for forgetting such things. One evening, under a sky that had decided to be gentle, Morrow walked up the livery aisle with a box under his arm. He set it on Marea's desk and opened it. Inside, a new mug, stoneware like hers, but with a small iron washer fired into the side where a handle joins the body. It looked like the thinnest moon. So it doesn't break where things like to break, he said. She touched the washer, felt the gloss. Thank you, he said. You going to turn the mouth up or down? He asked. Up, she said. For a while. He took that as the gift it was. They walked out to the porch. The sign swung slightly in a breeze that had learned its manners from the river. Its corner had a hole where a nail wasn't and a leather washer where one was. It hung honest. It spelled what it meant. It paid for the name it carried with small daily coins. Feed, water, patience, repair. What now? He asked. Now we wait for the next bad sentence to ride in, and we take its verbs away. He laughed quietly. You make grammar sound like salvation. It is, she said, when you get the subjects right. Night folded the town without hiding it. Lanterns answered, steady as breathing. Somewhere the jackrabbit boy, less rabbit by the day, read to a horse from Gus's ledger because the horse liked the sound of ink. Called and Cross argued in whispers over whether the fence needed one more brace, and then went to fetch one, not to win, but to try. Alma sang a work song that matched the hammer she was using on a bent hinge. Ezra sat on the church step with his hat over his eyes, listening to a town that didn't need him for 5 minutes. Maria stepped down into the square with Morrow beside her. She checked the trough, the aisle, the hooks with sand, the barrels with water, the mug on the desk, the trunk under blankets. She moved through the barn counting mercies and names. She paused at the sign and set her palm on the wood. It was warm. It was wood. It was right. Tell your wire, she said to Morrow, not taking her hand away, that if it lies again, I'll shoot its match. I'll tell it. It likes good stories. It hates being one. Good, she said. We've had our share. He took off his hat. He didn't put it back on for a while. The sky was better without it. The river went on being the river. The bridge went on being a bridge. The livery went on being a place where animals learned that hands can be better than ropes, and people learned that wood can be stronger than iron if someone says so every day and means it. And Maria Hollis, liveryman by sign and woman by choice and habit and work, went on keeping names from becoming smoke.